Hey everyone, it's our Shawn McBride. Welcome to another edition of Best in Events. We're going to be looking at the future of event spaces. My regular co-host Deirdra Watson's here joining me. She'll be on in just a minute. And we have Carol Benavidez, who's joining us. And she's in the event space world. She helps match people with the right space for what they're doing. And so we thought it'd be great to bring her on and see what she's seeing right now, but also do a little bit of forecasting and thinking about what we think the future of events might be. So say hi to everybody and maybe give us a little background on you and what you're doing, and then we'll jump into some questions about the future of spaces.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shawn and Deirdra, for having me on. My name is Carol Benavidez. I'm with HelmsBriscoe. I've been with HelmsBriscoe for 21 years. Prior to that, I worked in hotels and operations and group sales. And prior to that, I got a degree in hotel restaurant management. So I love the industry. I love to travel and I really enjoy our industry and look forward to this being a temporary fix where we're back to face-to-face meetings before we know it.
Yeah. And I think there's an X factor out there of how soon do we get back to events, and we have the regulatory side of when will we even be allowed to have events. And then there's a secondary piece, which a lot of us expect, which is the psychological side of, when are people really ready to re-engage. So what are you just hearing right now, Carol? What's going on? Talking to people, what are you hearing out there?
Every day seems to be different, right? We have different news out there. I'm based outside of Dallas, Texas, and we're going to have phase 1 opening starting tomorrow. And, what does that look like? I know I have spent a lot of time rescheduling meetings for March, April, June, starting to look at larger meetings for August and into the fall.
They're rescheduling from August dates or fall dates into the future.
The ones that have started in August and beyond are larger meetings, just because what we're looking at is maybe it's impossible to have larger gatherings at that time, that it may not come back that soon, that maybe we would be looking at smaller meetings. I have a group in August actually that is still trying to decide their options, and it's about 300 people. And so it's like, do we change it to virtual or do we do hybrid? They've talked to their AV company about possibly doing signage that would have people 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. They've talked about putting up glass partitions to make sure that people who are attending that meeting, if they go face to face, that they feel safe.
It's that's interesting. So tell me a little bit about the glass partition concept. Is this for
I don't know if anybody's been out to grocery stores or Home Depot is still up. You walk in and I was really surprised with Home Depot. You see masks, but you see the partitions up now, right? Yep. And so that might be our wave of the future in hotels too, to make sure that hotels, you may have been seeing the last week that they're talking about cleanliness and how they're going to change that. Mm-hmm. But is that enough, right?
Yeah. Deirdra and I did a whole segment about, cleaning. We had a cleaning expert on here, and we talked about, what the sanitation standards would be. And I think that's still evolving. I'm just trying to physically think about the layout of the partitions, whether that is that between people's seats when they're sitting in the audience, or is that when they're networking?
Yeah, what's hard too is a lot of these meetings, based on working with hotels, they would rather they rebook than to cancel, obviously, right? Sure. And so a lot of them are rebooking for, sometimes 2021, which I think we're going to struggle with finding supply, in the next 6 months, right, for future meetings.
Right.
But in the here and now, if you have smaller meetings in the next couple of months and, you still want to have it, how are we going to do food and beverage functions? How are we going to do networking receptions? If we don't put in additional, maybe glass partitions, to make sure that people feel safe and they're going by those guidelines.
And it's interesting when you say the glass partitions, all I can picture in my head is like the prison wall, right, where you've got one guy on the other side and you're using a phone and stuff like that. It's really hard to visualize.
It is
what
very
this
hard
is going to look like.
Well, yeah,
to make everyone comfortable about
Deirdra,
social gatherings.
And I was thinking about it too. even if you had glass partitions for like a networking event, you're going to change people, which means everything would need to be sanitized again, right? So you couldn't just glass partition between two people, because if you rotated the person on the other side, then you still have cross contamination issues.
Yeah, because the first conversation, I think it started last week, maybe even the week before. It's like, okay, are we going to have enough meeting space? If you have, let's just say 100 people, and you put in what the normal square footage that you would do, and let's say it's 2 per 6. Well, what if we now need to go 1 per 6 foot, right? Yeah. And so there's going to be additional space. So with the rescheduling of meetings, I mean, maybe short term we could do it, but 6 months from now, the hotels are not going to have the availability to offer more meeting space if all those meetings come through. So we're either going to have to do a reduction in meetings, or change it to a hybrid where, certain people can come, and then how do you make that decision, right? So right. A lot of things to think about.
Yeah, no, we've been talking about the spacing issue. Exactly. I mean, we talked recently with somebody who's doing an event. They were talking about putting people, 6 feet apart at a table, a round table. And that just really cuts down the number of seats you can have. And really, right. If you multiply that across the ballroom, you fill your ballroom up pretty quickly for a large event.
But
then, and then you're possibly doing overflow into other rooms.
Right. And you could do the overflow, right, Deirdra, and have, streaming, the general session or whatever, I've done that before when I've had larger meetings. Yeah. I mean, we could do that, but how do you look at the flow of going in and out of the ballroom? I mean, how do you control that, as far as, that you have the openings in and out, and, and the other thing is food and beverage, right? Buffets are probably going away for a while. I read an article yesterday where they were like, our chef is all about gourmet box lunches, right? To bring that possibly back.
Yeah, and probably some changes even with, the service system, right? I mean, you've got the box lunch concept, even table service. I was listening to a restaurant, and they would apply equally to events, which is how do you get the food in and out,
right,
between the kitchen and there. And they were talking about having, making sure you're using people to bus, and how do you keep contamination from going back to the kitchen. If somebody gets sick and brings it back to the kitchen, then it comes back out.
Right.
And real issues that we need to kind of hash through. I'm curious. You've got your pulse on people that are doing events, moving events. I just heard from somebody apparently that a major conference as late as November now is going to go virtual. So another one that's bites the dust as far out as that's 6 months plus in the future. So if we're going to do an event, right, and we're talking about needing more space. So when events come back, what is the dynamic? Do you think they're going to run out of space sometime in 2021, right? There's going to be a press. Is that kind of what I was taking from your earlier comments?
In my personal opinion, I think that's what's going to happen, just because of the rebooking. For example, I sent out a new RFP for a client that is rebooking, and the hotel that they had for 2020 is not available. And so for May, it was the 3rd week in May, but they always do it. It's 600 people. We sent it out to 5 cities, and we only have a few hotels that have availability for it. And granted, that probably takes most of the hotel's space, right? So it's kind of a buyout. But it's just, I have another group in September that's an association, 3,000 people. And the next open year is 2023, and we can't find it. So they're going to have to rebook for 2024, and we're just going to have to look for a different hotel for 23. So,
well, and that's one of the things that you deal with, because a lot of companies, and I know some of my clients have done multi-year agreements with properties. And so, they've already got 21, 22, and 23 booked.
Right.
And so now they're possibly, because they're about 300-400 people conference, now they're possibly looking at a larger venue. So what happens to those multi-year contracts, especially when they might not be at the same property or even under the same umbrella of companies where they can transfer contracts? What are your thoughts on that kind of situation?
I think It's really flexibility, right? On both sides on the hotel. We actually, with this one hotel, you know, they're having it for 2020. It's not going to happen. They just don't, they think it's too large for it to be a possibility. 23 is not available. So they do have dates for 2024, but they're asking them to book them that same hotel within a 10-year period, so that they still get 2 programs, because it's an association, right? They have to have a meeting, you know, and they like the hotel. And so we're going to redo the contract where they get 2 meetings in a certain time frame.
Yeah. That's kind of a creative solution, kind of moving the ball out a little bit, giving people some time to react.
Yeah.
You know, Carol, we had a lady named Heather Reed on here, one of our early guests when Deirdra and I started this specific series after coronavirus. And her whole thing is helping people negotiate contracts. And one of the things that we kind of centered upon was who's going to have the negotiating leverage. You know, is it going to be the events or is it going to be the hotels? What do you project, you know, going forward? Who's going to have the better hand in the negotiations?
You know, I feel like my past experience working for a hotel and then doing site selection now, I really believe in a win-win situation. I don't think that someone should have a say one way over the other. Every meeting is different. Every planner is different. Every event is different. To me, it's trying to find a win-win solution for both parties.
Yeah. And one of the things we specifically early targeted was the cleaning, which we kind of tangentially mentioned here a couple of times. Are you starting to see anybody start to put that in their contracts yet? Or are they starting to have conversations about cleaning, sanitation? I know we talked about the partitions, but kind of where's that in the process?
That's really interesting. I haven't had anyone ask or talk about putting it in a contract. I think it's one of the things that the hotels, the chains are all jumping on board. And, you know, one hotel chain was saying that they were going to partner with Lysol. I think it's going to be expected in that it's one of those things that it probably won't be in contracts that I don't see. It's going to be expected that they go by a higher standard of cleanliness than we've had before. And I had a hotel sales manager tell me the other day, she's like, we probably should have been doing this all along. You know, so I think it's going to be a new normal of us moving forward, that's going to be an expectation.
Yeah. And I think our concern was just, and Deirdra, I'll pass it to you just a second. Our concern was that people would, you know, without having it in the contract, you just don't know how good or bad of a job the hotel is going to do. I mean, of course, their reputation's on the line, but you just don't know because you don't know.
It might be something similar to like service levels. You don't, I mean, I see it in some contracts, especially for luxury high-end resorts, but you don't see it for the normal limited service property because it's expected.
Right. Deirdra?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I do when I'm doing site selection for the client is when I'm on site doing a site check, that's one of the discussions I have is, you know, what are your procedures, especially in the kitchen, you know, and when you're doing the tour, I think that's when those real discussions will take place, because that's when you're touring to look at the rooms. That's when you can actually see how they're doing their sanitation. You can't see the biotics around it, or the microbes, but you get an opportunity to see what their property looks like, and you know, especially their kitchen, especially their public washrooms, and the rooms and those surfaces. And that's when I think the conversation, other than, you know, because that's when you generally haven't signed the contract yet, when you're doing the on-site tours. So I think that's when your big discussions would happen then.
For sure. Agree.
Yeah. So I guess you got to have to play it case by case, right? So you're going to look at you may look at the history, you may look at the reputation. And I guess if you're particularly concerned, then you would probably have to get, you know, whatever. We've kind of theorized that some people may want to put sanitation. You will clean the hotel every night, you know, or you'll go through and, you know, wipe off. We were talking to Christy Record, who has a cleaning company, a large cleaning company, does commercial spaces. You know, maybe you put a provision in the contract says you'll clean all the surfaces that are touched at least every 2 or 3 hours, right? That's the kind of thing we're not seeing yet. And I guess the norms are still evolving, right? The hotels haven't gotten together yet and come up with a standard. And that's kind of the tricky space we're in, because you as an event host want everybody safe and clean, but the hotel doesn't even know what the norms are yet.
Yeah, and it's cleanliness, but it's also temperature checks. I mean, for employees, I've seen that one of their standards is going to be to take a temperature, and if somebody has a certain temperature, they're not going to be allowed to work that day. When has that ever happened, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that I think are going to be standard, because the hotel industry has to make us feel safe to come back, right? And
Right.
so they're going to put all those measures in place without it being in a contract.
Yeah. So you expect the industry is going to act quickly to
Yes.
kind of pull this together.
Yes.
And one of the things, one of the questions came up with Christy was, would you be able to, ask the hotel about their cleaning procedures? What do you think a hotel would say if you asked them about that at this point?
I think they would give it to you. I mean, because all the hotel chains they're detailing very much detail on exactly what they're doing, about how they're going to be in the lobby. They're going to station a person in the lobby to make sure that they're continuing to wipe services down. And I think that they're going to jump on board to provide that information so you feel safe to book their hotel.
Yeah. And I think one common theme we've had in this video series, Deirdra and I have done, is increased costs, right? So, we talk about more cleanliness, more service, more spacing. All of this points to higher costs. So I have to imagine the hotels are going to, at some point, have to pass through, this additional cleaning costs, the detailing costs, the prep costs. That's all going to have to flow through at some point to the contract prices.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, especially in meeting space, that if they don't do those costs to transient rooms, that we're going to see meeting room rentals come back. Because if you have to offer more space for less people, the meeting room rental goes straight to their bottom line, right? And so if they are a hotel that can't make it up in a transient higher rate, I think that's one of the things, is how they're going to be able to come up with a revenue source. Because most of the time, we're negotiating the big picture, right? We're negotiating guest rooms, food and beverage, AV or whatever, not to have meeting room rental. And, when you have a lot of breakouts and a lot of space, and if you're going to need more space, I think that's where they're going to cover their costs, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, because I can't imagine conferences going to smaller footprints now, right? Even if you're going to bring in less attendees, you're probably going to need the same amount of space.
All right.
So
Carol, just one question that I have, and I'm on the planner side, is what is one or two things that you can recommend to planners when they're looking at their venues, and in regards to, I guess, our new normal, because even though we're hoping our life will go back to a little bit of normalcy, what is it, when they're looking or searching for a venue, if they're not using a HelmsBriscoe or another site selection company, what are the one or two things that you can recommend that they look for in regards to a venue?
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind is, depending on the size of the group, let's say you have 100 people. Well, go look for a hotel that you could do a buyout of their space. Okay. Or if you have 600 people, do a buyout. So you have the flexibility of the meeting space being for only your group. And, whatever size that is, you can find, a hotel that will fit there. So instead of, for example, if you have a smaller meeting of, let's say 100 people, don't go to a convention center hotel, even though it might be convenient for location or whatever the case may be. Go to a hotel that there's flexibility with that meeting space. And then that way you own the hotel, right? And so you can play around with that space to make sure that you're covering everything for your group.
Yeah, I think that may be a trend that we're going to see, right? Is the matching of the hotel size to the event size, right? I mean, now you have some of that, but I think we may see a growing trend of, buy out the whole property so that you can control the flow, you can take the temperatures if you need to, you can control where people are flowing. We've given the example several times. I've seen in these huge hotels, you have a smaller conference and you've got people from other conferences or people that are using the pool and they're flowing through your meeting space.
That's right.
Yeah, and we've had lots of conversations about, well, you can pick this hotel, but you're the small fish and you don't know what other groups are going to be in there with you. And, and that creates a certain experience as well.
Yeah, and a lot of my clients have always wanted to be the conference on site. So, and I've always tried to fulfill that for them. So looking at, what's the square footage of your largest ballroom that you can handle a group, because, you might have only used, let's say, if there's 3 ballrooms, you might have used only ballroom A, but now you're going to need ballroom A and B, but who's going to be in C if it's a 50 group people? So you want to make sure that you can, and I agree with you, that you can do a buyout if you're a smaller group. Even if you're a group of 500, is that venue that you're going to go to be able to accommodate you? So when you had 500 before, you're going to actually need a space that would potentially fill 1,000 people before.
Right. And just, there's so many limited service properties out there too that have quite a bit of meeting space. Sometimes I'm like, really, is this a courtyard? And so it might be something as advice of looking further to look at those type of hotels too.
Yeah, which I think really comes into, that's your expertise, right, Carol? That's part of what you do is, take your typical event planner, you can run through the phone book, you can Google around, but you're in the business of knowing kind of what's out there, what the inventory is.
And especially, food and beverage is going to change, there are different ways with that. And so if you're looking at a courtyard or a hotel similar to that, there might be some creative ways to make sure that there's more safety precautions in food and beverage.
Yeah. So so we talked about kind of deferring to the hotel, but what's the next step beyond that as far as thinking about it? I mean, I guess it's a conversation. Especially if you're buying the place out, you can probably have a conversation about, this is what we expect, this is what we want done with the food and beverage service.
Yeah, and you probably could have better flexibility or creativity, knowing that you're the only group in house for those dates. And I really think that the hotels are going to step up too with different options that work for them with different groups. So.
Yeah, so a lot of evolution coming here.
Yes, for sure.
And I guess, so what do you do if you're planning right now? I mean, so you're moving your event forward. You have an event that you're going to host that maybe is in the fall or next year, and you're starting. You're trying to figure out what to do here. What do you suggest people do as far as having these conversations?
Our day-to-day keeps changing. And so that's a hard question to answer. For example, I had a group that we have to talk about international travelers, right? Coming into the US. And I had one in August that has 28 countries, and some of them take 6 months to get visas. And so
that's true.
That's a concern right now with meetings that are supposed to happen in 6 months. This is your planning time, right? Your time frame. And if you have international travels and we have no idea when certain countries are going to allow visas, you have to start looking at, can you still have the same type of quality meeting if you don't have those attendees? I have to tell you, a lot of hotels are having the conversations. If you don't cancel in the fall, let's look at reducing. I've seen several hotels come off, like, if you'll have this meeting, there's reduction in attrition or no attrition, moving forward for a meeting that happens at the end of the year. So I think the best advice is, like, look at worst case scenario if you reduced your numbers.
So the hotel's actually being proactive here and willing to work with people to accommodate a smaller size.
Yes.
Which I think leads into something else Deirdra and I wanted to talk about when we were kind of doing our notes beforehand that we exchanged with you, which is virtual events, right? So that's becoming a big piece of this now. Is some events are moving virtual, and I think we're going to see a lot of hybrid events. What does that play into the meeting space from your world? I mean, what types of issues come up, and what should people be thinking about if they're going to do a hybrid event? How does that play into the physical space?
It's I do have a meeting in August that's one of the options that they're doing. And so they're the ones with the partitions and the face mask and, the signage to make sure that you're and really looking at the hotel space and working with audio visual on what size does that look like. And then, partnering with a virtual vendor who can make sure that all the capabilities are there. And there's so much with that. Is it just a general session, or is it breakouts included? And some of the companies that we're talking to have a studio that's available to them, or they might still use a hotel to create that background, right? To use a production company and set that up. I mean, there's so many different factors with so many different meetings. And it's usually the larger ones that typically have their client base and still want to touch out to them and still have that sales for that company. Mm-hmm. And so I think in that case, I've actually had a couple of presentations recently from a couple of different clients or vendors that do virtual meetings. And it's so interesting. They can create a whole trade show with sponsors, and you can go visit their booth, and, so I think it's very much a temporary option for certain meetings.
Yeah. And I mean, are people starting to plan? So we talked about, some events moving into 22, 23, 24. So when you're looking that far out, 3-4 years from now, are people still thinking they're going to have the lower capacity, or are they thinking we'll have a vaccine and things will be back to normal? I mean, what are planners saying that they think is going to happen?
Each planner is different, but usually most of them feel that after 2021 that we will be back to where we, maybe not where we were before, but, back to some normalcy of what we had, maybe better practice of cleanliness and different ways that we do certain things obviously may not go back, but I haven't heard anything past 2021.
Okay. So nobody specifically talked about when they think, they're not saying, hey, we'll have a conference in 2022 and we'll have the same attendance we had in 2019 or per se. They're not looking that far out yet.
No, I think there's just too many things going on in our world that change every day. Just like today, they have a drug that they think might work. I mean, that could be a game changer, right?
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah. It's a tough situation, right? Because you got to plan in advance, but then there's a lot of extra uncertainty right now. Deirdra, I think you were popping in there.
Yeah, just one of, I'm on a lot of virtual groups, and, we all try to, discuss what's happening in the industry and everything else. But what we also do is ask everybody, how you doing? Here you are, you're in a stressful time. You've been doing this for over 20 years. How is this affecting, I guess, your work-life balance because of the stress involved? And I know based on the site selection side and the event planner side, of course, that, it's an extremely stressful time for our industry. How are you dealing with that on a personal level?
Is it bad to say that I'm glad the liquor stores are still open?
No, it's not.
If anybody knows me, I like red wine.
So do I.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And that is a theme that keeps coming up in all my calls. Alcohol consumption seems to be up. Alcohol sales seem to be up.
After 5.
It was so funny the other day we were talking about, I think it was Tito's that's, based in Texas, and they were starting to do hand sanitizer. And I was like, oh no, wait.
You can't lower your capacity, right?
Right, exactly. Every day is different, and, different challenges and different things to do, but there's lots of positives from this too. Yeah. And, I had one of my major clients, we've been having Zoom calls and talking about how can we do efficiencies that when we get back to normal, that, and we're super busy and all of this stuff, let's regroup and think about what we could do differently, what we could do better. And so I really think it's a pause button, and to really think about different ways that we can do different things, right? And I do know that some planners that maybe have gone direct, maybe they would look at a site selection company now to help them when there's a situation like this, to possibly use our buying power or what we have done with different clients, that we can pass that on as, because like you, Deirdra, we're a consultant, right?
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of information, and being able to share that with more people, there are a lot of positives.
Yeah. I think your negotiating leverage helps a lot too, right? Because you have these longer term relationships, and unfortunately, a lot of people have had to renegotiate right now. There's a lot of renegotiation.
Right, exactly.
More leverage.
I think and I think one of the other things that I'm seeing anyways is I won't say a pivot because everybody's using that, but a shift in business practices and business processes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to see, Shawn and I are going to continue this discussion after COVID, after we go back to normal, but it'd be really great to share some of the best practices that we've all learned through this process, because it's really about sharing that information. Not only are the planners and site selection companies like yourself and the venues and the AV companies and everything else, we're all in this together.
Yes.
Because our industry is a vital industry to the economy.
Yes.
Because it brings so many people in to different areas, and it's not over, and our industry is not over either, because I think this is just going to expand on the importance of people networking and people sharing and the benefits of that face-to-face, and how do we really get back to that point where, hey, you know what, I see you, Carol, at an event, I can go over and give you a hug, and nobody's going to go, oh, I'm going to catch something. It's like cooties, right? And so I think that this is a good opportunity for us all to share those new business practices, those new processes that we're all dealing with now.
I think that's such a great idea, because there's going to be so many great best practices that are going to come out of this. I mean, right now we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so we almost have to have a couple of those first meetings to say, oh, wow, this really worked. You try this, or it didn't work. And so let's change it to something different. And so
That's right.
I was supposed to travel the whole month of May, and no travel. I'm just like, I say every day, if my husband's still alive, I'm doing good.
There you go. I take care of things on the home front. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So I love the report saying that 89% of people, can't wait to get back out there and to see the world and to have those. I mean, it's all about experiences, right? And the people that you meet. And so I totally agree with you, Deirdra.
And that's why people go to conferences, largely is the people, right? You go to
and the networking,
interact, network, have those kind of, I don't know how many times I've had these little side discussions. You sit down with somebody, and you really get deep into something, and you learn a lot. You see somebody you see once a year or twice a year at a conference. It's really that personal connection, which is why everybody loves these conferences and fuels them along. So I think there's going to be a lot of people wanting to get back to it. The real question is just, how do we get back there? And I think we're still starting to look at the how.
And the timing, right? I really think that we'll get back there, but it's just like, how soon, right? To feel comfortable in this environment. And, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, just with some of these states starting to open up. And I mean, we're going to know really soon if, the phase 1, is okay for us to move forward.
We're going to start seeing some stats, right? So we'll start seeing some numbers. There's some real experiments going on right now.
And it's just, the airline industry too. I mean, look at the changes that they're going to do, in the short term. Nobody in middle seats, and, the cleanliness of the planes, and, making sure that the air on the plane is safe. And, there's a lot of things that are going to change in our industry that are not hotel or venue related as well.
Right. And JetBlue, I was just reading that JetBlue just actually stated that all passengers will wear masks.
Yes.
So, we're, which is really great. And, hopefully the other airlines, both, in US, Canada, and international, will follow with that. But what they're going to have to do, because most people aren't going to do this, is that the airlines are going to have to provide those masks.
Yes. And I think hotels will have to as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and that becomes an interesting question too, right? Do you ask people to wear masks? And, And obviously, one of the issues that's come up here in the U.S., one of the states had an order that said you have to wear your masks at all times if you're outside, but then they also opened restaurants, and there's a practical issue of wearing a mask while you're at a restaurant.
You're eating.
Yeah.
And so even with the best plans, at a conference, you're going to have to eat at some point, and so that means people are going to have to take down their mask at least for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to work through a lot of these practical issues to figure out.
Right.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Carol, just as we wrap up, kind of give us your best idea of, just from the mix of information. I know you can't give us exact dates and times, but how do you think this reopening process is going to look? And, what do you think? What do you think we should be looking forward to see how it's going?
I feel really positive that if we can get through the next couple of months, that we are going to see as early as August, there are going to be smaller meetings, yes. And that, you look at convention hotels that have large space, they're just going to have to reinvent, or a convention center reinvent how do you make it work with the smaller meetings? Because I think that's where we're going to start. I am so hopeful that 2021, just based on, moving events and what was already on the books, that we just need to get through the next couple of months of the safety, making us feel safe to be able to get on a plane and feel good about that, or staying in a hotel. And I know people are already doing that. But I am so optimistic about 2021 that we will see hotels thriving and all of us traveling by then.
Yeah. So
I agree.
Great. I mean, it would be a relief, it's still a long way away, but it would be nice to see some return to normalcy. Carol, you're just a wealth of information and stuff. You've been a wonderful
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with both of you, and really appreciate everything that you're doing with sharing this information. And I can't wait to have you, follow up. I love that idea.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you back again. In the meantime, why don't you tell folks how they can check you out, get to know you, get to know your work, and if they need your help, how would they find you?
So Carol Benavidez, I'm with HelmsBriscoe. I'm on LinkedIn. I would say my email address is cbenavidez@helmsbriscoe.com, but it's probably hard to spell. But you can probably find me on LinkedIn very easily, and would love to consult. I love meeting people, and just thank you again, both. I appreciate you.
Definitely.
Carol, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and learning from you on the site selection side and about spaces and best practices. So we do appreciate your time today.
Learned a lot, folks. Drop your comments, Best in Events on YouTube. Of course, make sure you're subscribed, because we'll be bringing you more videos in this series about what the future of events are and what's happening. So make sure you join us there. Looking forward to reading your comments. We'll see you all again soon. And pat yourself on the back for doing the hard work and investing in your future and the future of your business.